Hello and welcome to the Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk for A Measure of Belonging, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South. Tonight we are featuring Cinelle Barnes, Devi Laskar, Soniah Kamal, and Natalia Sylvester. I'm Kate Whitman, and I'm the Vice President of Author Programs and Community Engagement for the Atlanta History Center. I'm so glad you're joining us this evening to talk about a book that I have been raving about for months. I got an early copy and it's so great. I'm excited to hear these ladies speak. You can purchase copies of Measure of Belonging from Acapella Books at the link in the chat to the right of your screen. It is also at the link provided on the History Center's website. As the authors are talking, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many of them as time allows. And now to introduce the editor of A Measure of Belonging, Cinelle Barnes. Cinelle Barnes is a memoirist, essayist, and educator from Manila, Philippines, and is the author of Monsoon Mansion, a memoir, and Malaya, Essays on Freedom. She earned an MFA in creative nonfiction from Converse College. Her writing has appeared in BuzzFeed Reader, Catapult, Literary Hub, Hyphen, Panorama, a journal of intelligent travel, and South 85, among many others. Her work has received fellowships and grants from Bona, Kundiman, and John and Susan Bennett Memorial Arts Fund, as well as the Low Country Quarterly Arts Grant. Barnes is the 2018-2019 Writer-in-Residence at the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art in Charleston, South Carolina, where she and her family live. Thank you all for being here, and Cinelle, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Kate. Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending the evening with us wherever you are. And actually, if you can type in the chat where you're tuning in from, that'd be great. Just so we know where everyone's joining in from. And it's a way to build a sense of community tonight, since it seems like we all need it anyways. But as Kate said, I'm Cinelle Barnes. I'm an essayist and memoirist, an editor and educator, and the editor of this evening's featured book, A Measure of Belonging, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South. And it is my honor to welcome you to, virtually, the Atlanta History Center. A few of you who have read the book are likely tuned in tonight and know that A Measure of Belonging has been a dream project for me, and it's been 10 years in the making. A decade ago, I moved from New York City to the South as an undocumented immigrant, and the idea for this essay was conceived at a dinner where I was told by someone welcoming me, supposedly, that, she said, "Honey, nobody asked you to move here." And as I write in the book's introduction, she said, "Honey, nobody asked you to move here." And that was all. She finished her meal, pushed her chair back, slapped her cloth napkin on a table, left, and never spoke to me again in the years that her husbands shared a place of work. It was not that I wanted or needed to be asked to come somewhere or be a part of something. It was that I was told to my face at a welcome dinner by someone who could have been more than a stranger, that I was not, in fact, invited. The dismissal I felt that night would be felt again throughout the decade I've spent in the South. In these 10 years, I've had interactions, been privy to conversations, and encountered institutions, tangible and not, that could have led me to believe what my former employers, friends, relatives, teachers, and mentors told me way back when. There's nothing for you there. You're going to turn right back around. I haven't turned back around. Instead, I've committed myself to making this place as big as it actually is, because small is so 10 years ago. Small as that woman who called me honey. Small as the South that saves its best smiles, best hey-alls, and best resources to perpetuate our cultural homogeneity. And smaller the books about this region that refuse to acknowledge and celebrate the voices and narratives of honey me, honey she, honey he, honey they, and honey you. And no, there is not nothing for me here, and there is not nothing for other people of color. There is not nothing for readers like you. There is this book, this anthology. There are the established and emerging writers herein who not only have, but share. While their stories and styles differ, perhaps more so than even I anticipated, they never bought into the lie that they did not belong here. These essayists know how to take up space and make space. And here, it's here. When that woman said that nobody asked me to come here, I decided that every one of my projects thereafter would be an invitation for other people of color to come here, to be visible and to thrive here. Each one of these essays, then, is an invitation to step into power and to empower. An RSVP to, honey, I invite you to be here and tell me your story. My hope is that reading this book will activate you to make similar definitive choices wherever and whoever you are, so that, as Tony Jensen writes, this place would be a we rather than an it, that we all might feel a measure of belonging. And it has been a true delight and honor to collaborate with some of the finest writers in the South today, and truly some of the kindest, warmest, most intelligent women I know. It has been so sweet to receive laudatory remarks for their essays from people and publications that have engaged with the book. And for example, the New York Times recently included it in their new and noteworthy Sunday Book Review section, in which they said these essays challenge the idea of a monolithic Southern culture. Garden and Guns said, the South on exhibit here does feel new, polyglot, multiracial, small c Catholic, urbanized, unwilling to accommodate or overlook the past, but instead primed to confront it head on and keen to sift the South's virtues lovingly from its flaws. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution said, one of the things that makes this essay collection so powerful is its focus on the nuances of racism. We all know that KKK is racist, but what about that smiling white woman at the dinner party? In what ways does she undermine someone's sense of belonging? What about microaggressions? That is the issue here. And Crystal Wilkinson, the author of The Birds of Opulence, said, a measure of belonging is a major contribution to the canon of Southern literature, and each of the writers give of themselves fully. And speaking of writers and people that give of themselves fully, it is my joy to share this virtual stage with three brilliant women tonight who have contributed so much of themselves to this book. And first up, reading for you tonight is Soniah Kamal, a novelist, essayist, and public speaker. Her most recent novel, Unmarriageable, is a 2019 Financial Times Reader's Best Book, a 2019 book all Georgians should read, a 2020 Georgia Author of the Year for Literary Fiction nominee, and is shortlisted for the 2020 Townsend Prize for Fiction. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, An Isolated Incident, was shortlisted for several prizes. Soniah's work is in the New York Times, The Guardian, BuzzFeed, Georgia Review, Catapult, Normal School, The Bitter Southerner, and more. Reading next is Devi Laskar, whose debut novel, The Atlas of Reds and Blues, has garnered praise in the Washington Post, Chicago Review of Books, and Booklist. She holds an MFA from Columbia University and an MA from the University of Illinois, and her work has appeared or is forthcoming from such journals as Rattle, Tin House, and Crab Orchard Review. A native of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, she now lives in California. And last but certainly not the least is Natalia Sylvester, the author of two novels for adults, Chasing the Sun and Everyone Knows You Go Home, which won an International Latino Book Award and the Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction from the Texas Institute of Letters. Running, her debut novel for young adults, is a 2020 Junior Library Guild selection. Born in Lima, Peru, Sylvester grew up in Florida and Texas and received a BFA in creative writing from the University of Miami. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, Bustle, Catapult, Electric Literature, Latina Magazine, McSweeney's, and the Austin American Statesman. And so many accolades, I have to catch my breath. I'm truly so enamored and just admire these three ladies, and I know that you will too if you don't already. So without further ado, reading tonight, Soniah, Devi, and Natalia.
Who are you starting with?
You, my dear.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Well, thank you so much, Cinelle. And, it's wonderful to be here with Devi and Natalia and with you, of course, and just putting this together. I have loved every piece in this collection. I found the meaning of home and not home in every single one in some way. And it's a reflection, I think, for all of us who have been either born in the South, come to the South, lived in the South in whatever way. It's been a delight. Thank you so much for including me and my essay in here. So my essay is called Face. It's set in Georgia, where I've been living for the longest time I've lived anywhere in my peripatetic life. And I'm going to start in the middle. Actually, my reading will start in the middle, and I've just miscarried a 16 weeks fetus. So, should I kiss his face? The moment tested me as a mother like no other, but there was no pass or fail, winning or losing. There was only the remains of my baby resting in my palms, turned up prayer style, and the sound of my own beating heart. Finally, I held him to my heart before putting him in a sandwich bag, as the emergency room nurse instructed, so he could be sent for an autopsy. When I arrived at the hospital, a nurse said the autopsy results would take a few weeks. As I let go of the sandwich bag, an extreme weariness came over me. This was it. This was the end, and now my baby's face would be cut up and perhaps put in formaldehyde to be studied. I felt sick. I was placed on a gurney in a small room and hooked up to the IVs to monitor me for the next few hours. There comes a time when even though you are crying, you are tearless. I just stared at the blank wall. A Christian chaplain came in and stood beside me. I grasped his hand tightly, and he asked me in a southern accent, "Would you like to pray?" I'd grown up in a secular Islam where people from all faiths in desperate need of miracles turned to each other's gods. "I'm Muslim," I said, "but prayers are prayers." We prayed. He recited the Lord's Prayer, and I the Al-Fatiha, the prayer that begins the Quran, the one we recite at graves. I couldn't stop sharing the story of my miscarriage with everyone. It was as if I had opened the gates to a taboo subject. Family, friends, strangers, everyone would share either their own miscarriage story or someone else's. It turned out that even my mother had miscarried before me. And yet too many, including my husband, could not quite understand why I was so gutted. After all, I was told over and over again, I already had 2 kids, that I'd barely been 16 weeks. I could have another one, people said, as if babies are replaceable. I was told, it wasn't a stillbirth, you weren't full term, it was just a fetus, stop being so sad. It left me upset and alone to have conditions put on grief. One afternoon, after walking my kids back from the bus stop and serving them dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets for lunch, I told them that instead of story time today, we would clean out their Spider-Man and Dora the Explorer backpacks. As they knelt on the rug in a patch of sunshine, their small fingers unzipping their school bags to expose canvas bellies full of crayons and scuffed books, I blurted out, "The baby is gone." "Gone?" said my 7-year-old son. I said, "He died." My son's best friend's father had passed away, and so my son had an inkling of life after death. Darren's father was in heaven, and heaven was a good place. "So the baby's in heaven?" he said as his eyes filled up. "Like Darren's father?" "Yes," I said. I knew that whether heaven really existed or not, it certainly belonged to little children confronted with mortality. Over the next month, we began to recover, if recovery is the correct sum of time plus healing. My son put the ultrasound pictures in a photo album with pictures of his beloved dead guinea pigs. I took the crimson socks off the mantle and tucked them in the back of a drawer. One day, I received a call from the hospital. What did I want to do with the remains? As Muslims, we bury our dead. My husband called the local mosque to make arrangements, but he was informed that there could be no burial. In Islam, it is believed a soul enters the body at 120 days of gestation, about 16 weeks. And since my miscarriage took place right around that time, with no proof that a soul had indeed entered, Khyber, which is what I had named my baby boy, what others called fetus, could be considered only a soulless fetus. Fresh grief engulfed me. I called the hospital's perinatal loss clinic. Please, I said, please don't throw him in the trash. The kind woman told me that she had seen the remains and she could tell he'd been a beautiful baby. I managed a thank you. She said the hospital would take him with the remains of other such babies for a collective cremation. At first, thinking of a trip I'd taken to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., I recoiled at the thought of my baby being one of many. But eventually, by day's end, I found comfort in the idea of a collective. That way, I told myself, Khyber would at least never be alone. The cremated remains would be put in an urn and placed in a cemetery in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Until that moment, Stone Mountain, Georgia had been nothing more but a city where the KKK had once had a stronghold, a city popular for a park with a laser show, a city with a cable car ascending to a man-made plateau offering a scenic view. Does a city turn into a home when it rests your dead? We printed out directions to the cemetery in Stone Mountain where the ashes were buried. We drove in absolute silence through U-shaped headstones, many adorned with wreaths and Confederate soldier markings. My eyes searched for a small plot with a big urn shaded by an oak tree. Finally, we found it. It was marked by a marble bench with a carved dove on it. My son had brought an offering of a miniature teddy bear I'd given him for Valentine's Day, and my daughter a rose from our garden. I sat on the bench with the carved dove. I recited a prayer for my baby. I recited a prayer for all the babies. Thank you.
That was so beautiful, Sonia.
Oh, thank you, Devi.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. No, that was not easy. It's really, really beautiful.
Thank
Okay, I think I have the sad task of going after Sonia. I too am going to start from the beginning, not from the beginning, but from towards the middle of my my essay. And my essay is called Duos, and I'll just start from the middle. I want to say that I'm an expert at beginning again. I did it every day as I grew up. I do it still when I visit family. All of my formative years were spent in North Carolina, except for the year my dad did his sabbatical in West Germany. Yes, I'm that old. I remember a time when there were two countries named Germany. When I turned 8, and the many summers I spent in India visiting family and friends. I was raised in the South, but inside my parents' home was India, their version of West Bengal, food, music, language, culture. Theirs was their haven from the white, wide world around them. In the mornings, I would go to school and be American. Once I came home from school, and in the hours until bedtime, it was the bustle of Kolkata as best as my mother could envision it. The TV blared from the den, the diced vegetables rested in a plastic colander in the sink. Whole buffalo carp thawed in a melamine bowl, and the smell of ground spices permeated the air. My first jobs were to change from my mother-approved Indian outfit to home clothes, as she called it, wash my hands, eat a salty Indian snack, and start my homework. Although the voices on TV were speaking English, usually Phil Donahue or later Oprah, we only spoke Bengali to each other at home. After dinner, my father would play only mournful Bengali music on the 8-track. For many years, my mother won out on our frequent battles about clothes, and I had to wear Indian outfits to school, one she brought back from the subcontinent. Although my mother was working on a master's degree in English when she got married and moved to the United States, there was little she could do with her knowledge of British English in Chapel Hill. Outside her home, she often stared, perplexed at strangers, their Southern accents incomprehensible to her multilingual ear. She often muttered in Bengali, "I don't understand." Typically, I rescued her, interpreted, translated, made a small joke to ease the tension. Typically, these interactions were with older white women, at the pharmacy or the Food Lion, at Hancock Fabrics or the North Carolina National Bank. After I stepped in, the older ladies stopped looking at her and focused their gaze on me. Their scrutiny, their assumptions, made me feel small and big simultaneously. My otherness was enlarged, as if they were staring at me through a magnifying glass. "You're from here? You don't look like you're from here," these stranger ladies often said. Once at the grocery store, one of these women came within inches of my body and touched my hair. Another time, one reached over and fingered the beadwork at the hem of my kurti top my mother had made me change into before leaving the house. This was code. You aren't white. Often I smiled. I learned later that that is what primates do when they're threatened. Grin. Often I took out my Southern accent and applied it so they could understand what I was saying without feeling the direct sting of my contempt. Few things are worse than having to fake your way through a conversation you don't want to have with a woman that if you're rude to just then, you would no doubt run into 6 times a day for the next 2 years. At home, my mother was more clearly in charge when she wanted to be. She corrected me every time I accidentally switched into English. The few phone calls that came from India never lasted long. The script was the same. Our parents reassuring their closest relatives our health was fine, reassuring them we in America hadn't become American, loud-mouthed, disrespectful, disdainful of family. In short, all of the things our relatives saw in old soap operas, think Guiding Light and The Bold and the Beautiful, that were sometimes broadcast on a communal neighborhood TV a few doors down from their Kolkata homes. My parents were typical immigrants. Every moment in the present was placed on hold so that it could be shared via letter or infrequent telephone call home to India. Every extra dollar was stowed toward the tickets home and toward future purposes for family who lived 8,000 miles away. They spoke to each other in Bengali and often reminisced about their large families and their childhoods in India. Everything was different in America, and they clung fiercely to their memories. We were alone in the new world. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you for that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I relate a lot to many of what you're saying, especially the this idea of Americans being, like disrespectful and like, no, we haven't become that yet. Like there were so many things my parents would not like. I couldn't watch The Simpsons. I couldn't like I remember all these shows and it was always like, no, because you'll become disrespectful. Like those characters are rude and malcriados and like it's just so funny. I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you, Cinelle, for having me, for inviting me to be part of this anthology with so many writers who I admire, like Devi and Soniah. When I first received your email, I wasn't sure what I would write about, and I'd recently started kind of examining a little bit my own history as not only I was born in Peru. I came here when I was 4, but throughout my childhood, I was in and out of surgeries for a hip condition that I had. And at the time that Cinelle asked me to write this, I was realizing how much inevitably I couldn't help but look at my own medical history through a lens of migration, because the condition I have deals with displacement and actual unalignment of not only my hip, but my spine. And so much of my childhood and so much of the ways my doctors would speak of my body had to do with aligning me to a certain standard, making sure that parts of me fit in correctly, making sure I walked through the world in a correct way rather than with a limp. And so I realized so much of this that in the way that we internalize a lot of xenophobia and racism when we think about assimilation, and it's something that we have to grow to unlearn. That throughout my life, I've also been doing that same thing, having to grow and unlearn ableism. And so this essay in some ways was part of that process. And I know that, those are journeys, and for me, I feel like it has no beginning and end, but I was just so grateful to be able to explore that in this essay. So I'm also going to read just starting from the middle. Let me just do that. Okay. The first words I ever spoke in English were not mine. I was 4, and my family hadn't even been in the United States a year when my mom took me to see an orthopedic surgeon at Miami Children's Hospital. On the drive over, she handed me a silver figurine, no taller than a can of Coke. It was sculpted in the shape of a llama, or perhaps it was a cathedral. I know with certainty it was one of these two, because in Peru these are typical gifts, small tokens given to others as if to say, here is a part of us and our culture. Repeat after me, my mother said. This is for you, Dr. King. This is for you, Dr. King. Again and again, until I'd committed the words to memory, until they were sounds I could sing without understanding them. I practiced my piece with arms outstretched, both hands holding my offering as if it were a heavy stone rather than thin sheets of precious metal. Given his name, I imagined my doctor as a regal, authoritarian figure, someone capable of great power but also benevolence. He and so many others gained my trust implicitly as my family moved from state to state throughout the 90s. The doctor in Gainesville, Florida, who was dressed as a witch on the Halloween afternoon we first met when I was 9. The surgeon from San Antonio, who everyone in McAllen, Texas insisted was the best, who we had to wait months to see when I was 11 because he only visited the Rio Grande Valley twice a year. The good friend of my uncle's, a Haitian-American surgeon who last operated on me at 14 in a typically 2-hour procedure that took 6. It turned out the renowned San Antonio doctor had told us all looked good. No further treatment was necessary, but he should have operated on me years ago. I was born with a problem on my left hip. Throughout childhood, this is the language I had to explain it. Because how do you tell a 1, 2, 3, 6-year-old why her body is always needing to be fixed, why the surgeries come one after the other, without admitting that there is just something slightly off? The way the doctors explained it to me was by balling one hand into a fist and covering it with the other. This was a healthy hip in its socket. Then they'd slide the fist under their palm and fingers until the fingertips were barely holding onto the knuckles, until it looked like at any moment the head of the hip could just slip out of its socket. This was my hip. Solving the problem of its displacement meant braces and casts, screws and hardware drilled in and out of my femur, crutches and walkers and wheelchairs. You'll be able to feel the rain coming, is what Dr. King once told me. But being 6, I didn't understand what he meant. That arthritic joints ache when the barometric pressure in the air shifts before the rain falls, that some people can sense the weather in their bones. Instead, I pictured it as a superpower, my body triumphing over the weather report. I couldn't have imagined that what he described, with such glee that I practically wished for it, was pain. In the end, it didn't matter, because I never felt the rain, or perhaps I always felt it and didn't know the difference. Nearly every day in Miami, it showers, and when it doesn't, the humidity looms, a thick coat over your skin. My body didn't have a barometer for what was a normal amount of discomfort. 2 years ago, my mom gave me a plastic bag filled with old pictures of my father's side of the family and my first Peruvian passport. In it, I'm maybe 6 months old. The black and white square picture is a study in contrasts. White, overflowing dress, black, wide eyes. Flipping through it, I expected to find evidence of when we first moved to the United States in 1988. Instead, I found a stamp from 85. This is a first office visit for this 7-month-old female seen at this time for evaluation concerning the lower extremities. We came here before we moved, I asked. You and I did, my mom said, to see Dr. King. Before we came for a better life, we came hoping for better care. Later, I would find Dr. King's notes in a manila folder my mother gave me, labeled Natalia's medical records in pencil. Pages of operative reports, post-op reports, and radiology consultations have slowly begun to fill in the gaps between my knowledge of my body and my doctor's. On a treatment record dated March 1994, the day my cast was removed 6 weeks post-surgery, my physical therapist wrote, "The patient is very anxious/hesitant concerning left knee movements." They recorded status. I remember the ache. Minutes after my cast was removed, with my legs stiff and atrophied, my knee unable to bend from the position it held for the last 42 days, an X-ray technician placed me on a metal table and pushed my leg taut against the cold surface without even a hint of a warning. That one forced movement caused the greatest pain I'd ever felt, before and since then. I kept quiet through all of it, afraid to give voice to the pain or betray the silent plea of my first English words in this country. "This is for you, Dr. King. Here is a part of me. Take good care of it. Be kind." And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you three. Every time I read your essays and listen to you, I'm reminded that, whether it's in Sonia's story and it's about the babies we love and carry in our bodies, or Devi, the outfits that your parents had you wear, or your body's history, Natalia, it's interesting for me to see, these essays come in to my inbox as a response to, hey, tell me about your sense of place in the South. And of course, bodies are places. We inhabit them just like we do a house, a building, a city. And just like the essay is kind of like a body, right? It's got a skin, it's got a skeleton, it's got all these moving parts, and it's got its organs and its heartbeat. That to me was one of the really magical parts of editing this essay, was to see how all 21 writers were reflecting on and discovering their sense of place in the South, in this region, through not the lens of the eyes, but the lens of the whole body, and all things physical and relational and emotional and mental and spiritual that go along with it. But that's just to say that I hope that gives everyone else a sense for how this all came together. And the short answer is it came together because people were just so honest and were willing to attempt at a discovery of some sort. But I wanted to ask our three essayists tonight, for the three of you, I'm curious to know how you've been able to find community in the South, or perhaps how you might have maintained or built a connection with your home culture or heritage while being here. And someone actually also asked, this has been part of my question, I think Isis did, any advice for young Southern writers of color, or really any person of color trying to find their way here?
I'll jump in with that last question. So I think the one thing that all of us here on the panel and all of us who've ever been published have in common is that we didn't quit, right? And we can all safely raise our hands if asked, how many times has somebody told you to quit? All of us can raise our hands, right? But none of us quit. And so what I would say is to just keep going, and it's great to build a community and find people who are like-minded. And obviously it's really hard to do that in a pandemic, but but there are events like this, right? And there are events where you can be a part of something and draw some inspiration, but also just to, persist, right? It is so important, and it's our, I think, literary citizenship responsibility to make space for all the people who are going to come after us, who don't look like the dominant male culture, which is publishing, right? And 86% of it is still white and male, right? So time to shake things up a bit.
Soniah or Natalia, do you have anything you'd like to share?
So can I ask you again to repeat the first question? Because I see this one here by Isis, but I just want to make sure I'm also answering the original one you asked.
Yeah, so the two are kind of related, but you can answer one or the other. But I'm curious to know, this was something that was asked last night at a different event. Someone in the audience, I really commend them, just said, how do you find community here? And I'm really struggling. How did you guys learn to thrive here?
Yeah. I feel like there's such a shift for me. Like, I moved around a lot when I was young. We were in Miami first, and like I said, we were in Central Florida, then we were in South Texas, and then back in Miami. And the whole point was always to come back to Miami because that's where my family was. And then strangely, after I got married, we lived in Miami when we finally moved back to Miami, I was like in 7th grade, and I went to high school and college in Miami. I thought that would be where, like, my life, that's where home was for me, because I felt like my childhood was defined so much by going back that I couldn't imagine ever leaving. And yet I did, because I've been living in Texas for the last 7 or 10 years. That's when my husband and I moved here soon after we got married. It really changed how I saw myself in spaces. Because as a Latina, to live in Miami, where I never really, at least physically, I didn't necessarily feel like a minority. Yeah, I hate that word, but and yet I know that I didn't see myself in like culture, outside of that. And I feel like once I left, I really started to connect with community based on less of an idea of it was the first time I'd really felt othered, and I was so disturbed by it that I just really wanted to find community that refused it, that just refuted this idea, because to accept othering is to accept that a place belongs to someone else. Even when we talk about so-called white spaces, like, I hate that term, because you can't tell me that a space, even though it is white, but you can't, that's language that feels like this space belongs to only certain people. And it's like, well, you can't tell me that a place built on the torture and genocide of Indigenous people, that a place built on the enslavement and atrociousness and acts that happened to Black people, and on the labor that over the years have happened to immigrants. So many things. You can't tell me that belongs solely to you. That's just another lie And so I think that to me, community is about finding people who are willing to just be honest, to not only celebrate places for the things that you are proud of, but to really be okay with confronting and interrogating the things that should be like uprooted and changed, and we can't be constantly hiding from that. And I think that the South has such a history of that, that it's so powerful to have an anthology like this that is actively saying, no, actually, like, this is what I loved so much about your essays, Cinelle, is like when you talk about the repetition of here, that there's something in saying that is taking it back. And that is saying, like, no, you can't tell me that I'm not here. You can't tell me that I'm in some marginalized corner. So I feel like, to me, that's where I find community, is with people who I feel I can be here with. And yeah. And as far as for advice, I mean, I'll keep this really short, but I'm thinking of advice for other writers of color in the South. There's a poem, and I can't remember exactly the title right now, but by Barbara Jane Reyes. in which she has this really wonderful line when she says, "You're not my gravity." And I think of that all the time. It's like, what are the forces that that we're reacting to shape, what are the ones shaping us, and why can't they be the ones coming from our own selves rather than those that would be imposed on us and those that others want us to think define us when that's not the truth.
I think community, for me, the definition is always so vital and important because it shifts. It's not static. It's always shifting, and it's very fluid. And like Natalia, I grew up, at least in my case, in a lot of different countries, and then I've moved around in the US a lot also. And I think there's a few things which are more othering, if you want to use that word, than as a child being shifted to different schools and having to confront the first day of school. And as a child, we're so often asked, the most popular question seems to be, did you make any friends? Who's your best friend? And in a way, it's such a dreaded question because you on the one hand you want to make your parents happy, your mother happy, and say, yes, I made everyone's my friend and whatever, but it's not that easy. And friendship is another word for community, or one of the words for community and stuff. And I think it becomes almost a little harder the older you grow and the more you go from place to place to place, because you come into your own more, and that makes you more discerning of who is your community and who you want to make your community also. I will say, my husband's job brought us to Georgia, so this wasn't a move that and all I knew about Georgia really when we were moving here. I visited here. I had an aunt living in Marietta, but she had long moved to Pakistan when we finally moved here, and I knew Scarlett O'Hara. And just book stuff, and I didn't really know much. And I remember when we drove in, I saw this vine, the kudzu vine, around the trees, and I thought it was beautiful, and I was so fascinated. And then finally, when I found out what it was, and that it was bought in from the Japanese bought it in, and how it was not indigenous, but how it's helped preserve a lot of stuff, or not, so many different conflicting things. I think it's very beautiful. But for me, community, sometimes nature is community, is all I can say. Just being able to step out, close your eyes, and just the sense of wind and sun on your skin, or even rain, it connects me to all the communities I've been part. Just nature tends to have that. But I think in some way, then this is a story where I feel that mine and not mine. When I first moved here, we knew no one in Georgia, and bookstores and libraries have always been my family. Just the books have, for me, books they grew me up. They were my parents. They're just, I just sometimes don't even want to know the writers. I just want to know the books, and they're my family. But I was in Barnes and Nobles, and North Point Barnes and Nobles in Georgia, and I was just there, and there was an announcement that the African American Book Club was beginning to talk. And I thought for a second, I was like, should I go? Shouldn't I go? Should I go? Shouldn't I go? And I said, you know what? I'll just go and stand. And I went, and there was a table full of, I think, 12, 15, quite a few older African American women. I stood there, and one of them looked at me, Claudia, and she's like, would you like to join us? Or would you like to sit down? And I was like, I don't know what prompted me to say this. And this is something which I always wonder about, because I told her, I'm not African American. And I remember Claudia looked me up and down. She said, yeah, we can see that. Sit down. And I was part of that group for so long, and I still am. And we just had a, Zoom meeting. And this was almost, 10 years ago and stuff. And is it community? Is it not community? What sort of community is it to be brown and originally from Pakistan, and yet to sit at that table with women who have such a different history when it comes to the US and with Georgia and with this land, and we read African novels predominantly always by novels or books and stuff by African American authors, and to hear their interpretations of books and versus what I, as an immigrant American per se, looking at this culture bring, it's a different form of family. discussing books and book clubs and books and everything, that is family of a different sort, you know? So as for what is community, what isn't, I don't know what community really is. I know what it's not. You know, but and also just advice for other writers of color writing about the South. You know, for me, place is always location, dislocation, and relocation, which is how it's the cycle, you know, that wheel of my life. And I think the biggest thing I can say is just be honest. Some of these truths are very hard to write about, you know, and they're uncomfortable, because when you talk about people's racial identities or ethnicities and stuff, it's a hard hurdle to sometimes cross, and I think just being honest with yourself on the page, and with what you've witnessed and encountered, and your own reactions sometimes to things also, you know. I think that's the biggest advice I can give, is just, you know, if you're a writer, your biggest tool is your honesty, because sometimes I know people are scared of honesty. Pearl Clegg once said a wonderful thing, which was, you know, she said, other people, something akin to how other people's censure is not my responsibility. My responsibility is just to be honest and stuff. And I thought that I really took that to heart. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, just then, you know, all that honesty that you three just so freely gave, I think, you know, even I'm thinking back to how I met each one of you. A question I always get is, how did you choose these writers, or how did you build that roster? I was just like, these are the people I love, you know. And Natalia I met because we shared an editor, and then Devi and I was in the throes of early motherhood in Charleston, South Carolina, and just needed a writing community. And I had been in writing communities where I didn't feel like I received the kind of you know, writing like advice that I needed for the kind of work that I was doing. So we met at VONA, which is Voices of the Nation's Arts, which is a workshop. And at the time it was at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's a workshop just for writers of color. And that was very empowering for me. And then I met Soniah through Devi and like the writing community. And, you know, I was trying to find community so that I could write the words that I needed to get on the page. But at the same time, my words kind of led me to these people, and their words kind of led them to me. And, you know, all about, you know, nature and animals, that's community too. For me, it's like all these plants that we've swapped from random people, from strangers. Like, if you ever catch my husband looking like he's like dealing something, it's just a plant. Like swapped on like some Facebook group where you apparently can like swap plants, you know. And that's kind of how I feel about books. Or like Bookstagram. I just looked today, I was like, what's my next book? And I just look there. Libraries are the same, and like you said, sometimes you have to build what you don't have. And that was the reason for this book. This is a book that I wanted to read as a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 20-year-old, you know, and a 30-year-old. And I remember my dad calling like frantically every couple of weeks, or actually every couple of days, if not hours, when I first moved here, like, are you gonna come back now? Are you gonna come back to New York? How are they treating you? And I'd be like, it's hard, but just give me time. I'm building a country within a country. Like, give me time. You know, like, I know what I'm doing. And, you know, and
I have to say for a second, that is so weird. That is the title of one of my short stories. So yeah, country, because that's exactly what it feels like. It is a country, you know, your communities and all sorts of things. They are countries with, you know, you have stuff like little Havana and little China and little India and little Pakistan and little this and little, and little with it is so interesting also, right? Because they're little geographically, maybe one strip or whatever, but actually they're huge and they're large and they're big. And because that whole country is in that little, so I've always found that contrast so interesting. But yeah, when you said that, I was like, my title, I have to.
I planned that. But I love that. See, but this is like, when you're honest, your honesty reaches someone as is honest.
But Cinelle, I also want to say the fact that you said that phrase and that I have a title, I've written a short story with that title and which I might expand, but it's just so interesting, right? Because there's overlap right there. So even though we come from different cultures, different ethnicities, different whatever, but we find ourselves living in the same geographical space, just that we would both have that sense of a country within a country. And I'm sure all of us, Natalia, Devi, all of us do, all the 21 people in here perhaps do, especially if they've come from, it's just so fascinating, the things which connect rather than disconnect. So
absolutely. And I think, one of the things we all share is, I was definitely nodding, as the three of you were reading, and I could see you guys nodding at me. It's like, I think when I was growing up, the few friends that I had that were like me in the sense that they came from somewhere else or their families did, we used to joke about how our parents must have all gone to the same school of the, gotta speak your native language at home, gotta wear your native clothing at school, you can't do this and can't do that because, you'll become American. And I just now I think it's kind of funny that I was like, they must just all go to the same place at night, and get tips from each other because they start to sound alike despite, whether we were all Indian or all something else, and it just made me laugh. And there's this.
No, I was just going to say, it's always so fascinating that the phrase that so many have heard about, you're going to turn American or whatever. And what does that even mean?
Right.
And we deconstruct that and what it means to be American and how many different American type, whether it's Southern, whether it's Midwest, whether it's whatever. But even within that American thing, but somehow as a kid, it sort of, for me, it came down to, you are not Madonna, because Madonna was very influential. And also, and Natalia, I think, mentioned it also, it was just the disrespect, right? The talking back. To be, if one is going to, as a child, pan label what it meant to be American, for a lot of parents, it really did mean don't talk back and don't be disrespectful. And I think that probably applies very much in 2020 to a lot of which brings up the whole concept. And I think a lot of what a lot of us struggled with, perhaps, and our parents did too, was the whole sense of individual and community, because that seemed to be the two, the at home and the outside of home, and who you were within both those spaces. Yeah,
I think that's definitely always going to be a tension in my life. When I find myself sitting too deep into my individuality, then I crave community. And then when I'm so deep in community, I realize, oh my gosh, you have so much to unlearn, Cinelle, because you have become a chameleon and you've learned to interact in ways that aren't really you. And then I have to migrate again and migrate again and migrate, or merge and merge and merge, or just like shed. But speaking of change, there's another question from our audience for our last 5 minutes. I think I'm going to merge two, actually. One is from Isis and one is from Allie. And Isis asked, what's your ultimate vision for the new American South, in quotation marks? And Allie asked, what are your thoughts on the Southern literary canon? And maybe if we're trying to imagine this new American South, or trying to realize a new American South, are there writers that we hope would be canonized, whatever that means?
So, I grew up here, starting, I did every single grade here, I was born here. So I was always fascinated by who got put in the quote unquote canon. And I just did not understand rhyme or reason as to why we were learning the same stuff over and over again, and I just feel like we're in a place where we can open the doors very wide for everyone to get a seat at the table. And this is the time to just get as many diverse voices at a place at the table, because it's at that point I feel like more and more of us are getting published, and we we just need to keep that door open for the next wave and the wave after that. But also, I refuse to subscribe to the idea that we need to add to their canon. I think we should be just coming up with our own. I feel like there are plenty of really amazing, talented writers who are not dead white males, and and we can really do something here by lifting each other's work up. One of the great things about social media, one of the only good things about social media, is that we finally have a place where we can actually vocalize our support for others, and it works, and I think that I really hope that when we all put our heads together, we can figure out a way to spread the idea of our own canon that is independent of the white gaze, and that it's an alternative to what is being taught in school still.
Yeah, you said seat at the table, and I was thinking that, one makes one's own table sometimes, the way Cinelle has with this anthology. So, instead of waiting for a place to open up or whatever, this is this is a table, and there's a lot more place at that table for so many. But, for me, how do I see the American South or any space is, when I first moved to Georgia, I remember vividly one of the first things that, one of my neighbors actually told me was she warned me about leaving a certain area of Georgia and not going into rural Georgia after dark because they would shoot me. Now, this was 15 years ago, and my kids were still in kindergarten and everything. I remember looking at her face saying, what is she talking? Because I hadn't grown up here per se. I'd grown up internationally, and I'd come here for college. College life is so different. Then I got married, moved around and stuff. And I remember her saying that, and I was like, what is she, what do you, I knew what she was saying, but I was like, they still, there's still pockets which are so unsafe. And I think going forth, what I would, which in today's times, unfortunately is still there and seems a little precarious, and I hope it definitely changes, but I would like the New South to be safe for everyone going forth, for our words, for our feelings, for our bodies, for what we see around us is just, it's unsafe is an understatement. For African Americans, for so many, it's disastrous. And I would like to see safety. I would like to see the same respect for our bodies that some bodies automatically get, is what I would like to see. And for our words also. None of us should be afraid to stand up anywhere and speak our truths and speak truth to power. And that is the New South that I would like to live in. My children are born here, raised here. That's the South, that's the country, that's the America I want to give them and determined to give them.
That's great.
Gosh, I don't even know how much more to add to that, because it's just so wonderful and beautiful what you both said, and true. But I guess one thing I'm thinking is, Cinelle, you were the first person to ever even consider me a Southerner, and that's and I get it. I get that maybe Florida and Texas, sometimes not everyone thinks of it as the South. I have driven through Florida, and it doesn't feel like a safe place. I've never seen more Confederate flags when I drive through than when I've driven through Central Florida. I've made the trip between Florida and Texas many times. I think of when I was living in Central Florida and I was 9, and my own ignorance is that at the time it was the first time I'd ever seen Gone with the Wind, and I was just so fascinated by the dresses that I told my mom, I was like, I wish I could have lived there at that time, because I just wanted to wear pretty dresses. And she said to me, they wouldn't have wanted you there. Yeah. And it's something that, and I think she said it a little more harshly, but I'm kind of just really wanting to drive that point home, like really telling me it wouldn't have been safe for you. And I really think of that, like contrasting that to just the simple act, Cinelle, of you saying, can you write about this because you're one of us, and you belong here too. And it's just something so beautiful. And it kind of just goes back to what Devi and Soniah, you were both saying about like us creating these spaces. Like, why would we want to sit at a table that doesn't want us? Like, why sit at that table that, like, someone told you you're not welcome? You know, why not create our own table and make each other safe? And I think that it's not to say that that's what we're tasked with, because I think it's a beautiful task to think about, you know, to think that we can do that. We can remind each other, like, hey, you're here and therefore you belong here. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Oh, I didn't plan on ending tonight crying. But if this event is an indicator of what went into this book and what surrounds this book and what birthed this book and what I think will keep giving it legs and breath, this is a gift from us to you, readers. So I hope you gift it to other people, right? That's how we build the table. That's how we add seats to the table. That's how we make the seats, you know, suitable for every person. And I think it was Melissa Phoebus who said, you know, we got to drag all our stories into the room because that's how it gets bigger. And so I hope that wherever you are and whoever you are, you join us in dragging stories into the room, building our mansion. For me, that would be all black and white and really just Rose Apothecary blown up. But thank you so much for being here, you three ladies. I'm so thankful for you, and I'm truly thankful for your words and for your dedication to the world of letters.
You know, and I just want to also say this, the sentence that was said to you, you know, that no one told you to come here. So many of us have heard in that form or in a different form. And the fact that you took it and did something so marvelous and brought people together with it is just remarkable and wonderful in itself. You did something positive with it. You know, you constructed on that rather than deconstructed. And also just that when people say no one told you to come here, that is all very well, and that's wonderful. But the fact is, when someone has a criticism, or when someone has something to add to the culture, the land, the country that they're now living in, it comes from a space of caring. People often mistake that it's coming from a sense of uncaring, but it's not. It's coming from a sense of caring and wanting to make something that is already there better. And I think with this anthology, Cinelle, you've definitely, and all the contributors, and you know, it's made it better. It's made it already a better space, a safer space, and a space that is so much more inclusive than it was when you were told that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.
I wish we could stay on forever, and then you can watch me really ugly cry. I just put that up on YouTube just for people to hear ASMR. But it's 8:04, and unfortunately, we do have to let everybody go. But I'm so thankful for all of you, and this, I believe, is recorded and will be made available through the Atlanta History Center's website if you'd like to post it or send it to someone or encourage someone with this conversation. Thank you again, and I'm seeing all your chats. I'm going to respond to all of them. So have a good evening, and thank you.
Thank you all so much. And so this was such an honor. So thank you. Like, just being part of this anthology, but also sharing this evening with you also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.